Welcome, everyone, to the first ever episode of the Winning Play Podcast. Alongside my co-host, Drew James, I am Kendall Capps. Essentially, this show, we are going to be diving heavily into the NFL, both from a football perspective, a fantasy perspective in particular, as well as the sports betting angle with a lot of tidbits and some knowledge in that area. And man, I can't tell you, every year, I feel like I get more and more excited when mid-August comes.
Oh, yeah. I'm jonesing right now. I've got 2 drafts Sunday. I've got another fantasy draft coming up on Thursday. I'm doing 5 leagues this year, so I'm neck deep in research. I've got all 3 screens here in the compound going. I'm ready to get going. How about you?
You know, it's funny. I used to have 5, and then my wife convinced me, well, I shouldn't say, kind of, you know, she was like, I think that's taking a little too much of your time, so I've had to pare it down to 4 this year. But, you know, one of which you and I are in together, and I'm sure we'll discuss that from time to time, you know, in the shows to come. And, you know, that what's it been, 15 years, 14 years of show or so that we've had that league going. And I think...
Yeah, I believe this is the 15th year.
15th year. And I think, like, of all the leagues, that's the one, knowing we ship the trophy around the country, I think everybody just about takes that as seriously as you could possibly take a league.
Yeah, and for anybody listening, Kendall and I have been working and playing together in sports for 15 years or so, maybe a little more. We worked at Fox Sports together. I've run a sports bar here in LA. Kendall, you can tell them a little bit about your experience, but we both played fantasy together for at least 15 years in basketball, baseball, football, you name it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the knowledge is essentially endless. I have spent most of my life studying almost every sport there is and working in sports television, in sports editorial, in digital, in marketing. And yet, like, I always come back to fantasy and the betting stuff. It's just, I'm really passionate about it. I remember when I was a kid, I would help my mom with the little parlay card. So I was ingratiated to the betting stuff well before it was like legal anywhere and you had to hand stuff off to your bookie behind the bar. So it's been something that I've really enjoyed and been involved in for a very long time. And it's great that we get a chance to now do this, you know?
Yeah. So in excitement for getting the new year started here, let's talk about what's changed. What are your, how about team to team? What are your biggest offseason moves here, especially when it comes to fantasy impact, but also just real-time NFL impact as well?
Well, it's funny. So we're recording this show on Friday, and just yesterday, there was a shocking trade, speaking of moves, having potential fantasy impacts, and the Washington Commanders sending Jahan Dotson to a division rival in the Eagles, essentially for a 3rd rounder. It was really interesting to see the move. You don't normally see trades within a division, and you certainly don't see it when you used a 1st-round pick on him 2 years ago, and it's not like he hasn't shown flashes of potential. So it's really interesting. I do think that, you know, maybe muddies the waters a little bit in Philadelphia, but I think the biggest winner in that little move, albeit it's not a huge thing, keep an eye out for Dyami Brown, who now probably has the wide receiver 2 slot all to himself, to a rookie quarterback that's going to be looking to try to make a name for himself coming off his amazing Heisman campaign last year.
I love it. I mean, one of my biggest moves, we stayed on the same team, is Saquon moving to the Eagles. I think that's really going to open up what they're trying to do on offense. And if that all meshes together, I think they can be a really strong playoff / Super Bowl contender here. And now the addition of Dotson, can only help.
Yes, but sometimes it's, you know, you could have too many cookies in the jar. And I know we're going to talk ad nauseum, I'm sure, about the Eagles at different points throughout our shows here. But, you know, with the way the season ended last year, and it seemed blatantly obvious that the team just quit on their coach, it was rather surprising to see them even bring him back this year. And so there's a lot of question marks surrounding the Eagles this year coming into the season. And I know Saquon on paper, you know, he's going as a 2nd-round pick, late 1st, early 2nd in a lot of drafts. And, you know, obviously there's still value there, or there's still talent there. But if you look at the metrics the last couple of seasons, I think only he and Rashad White last year were the only backs to have 6% or less of their carries finish below like a yard after first contact or something like that. It was some really out there stat, but it really stood out to me to recognize like this is not the same Saquon that we remember from a few years ago. And I think everybody just overlooks that fact and just assumes he's Saquon.
What about outside of player movement? What about some of the new rules? What do you think about the new kickoffs this year?
Dude, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. I get that for many years there was a lot of injuries on kickoffs. You got guys running downfield at 100 miles an hour, taking people's heads off. And so the NFL is trying to mitigate injury risk. And then they tweaked the rules previously, but then we saw the most touchbacks in the history of the league. And I feel like that kind of backfired a little bit, so it forced them to have to try to tweak it again. But man, there's so many different intricacies. If the ball comes up short of the 20, they get it at the 40. If it bounces between the goal line and the 20 but goes in the end zone, they get it at the 20. But if they catch it in the end zone, they get it at the 30. I mean, it's going to take a little while, I think, before the fans really have a grasp on what the new rule is.
With the way it's set up, do you think it's going to cause more kickoff returns for TDs, more long kick returns, or do you think it'll actually cut down on it and make it kind of a Oklahoma drill 10-yard struggle?
I actually think there's more potential for big splash plays, which obviously is their goal, knowing if you essentially only need maybe one or two creases and you could be gone. It's not like there's a lot of space for the kicking team to evade the blockers. Like they're starting on the opposing side of the field 10 yards away from them and don't get a running start. So it's going to be a little bit easier, I feel like, to make the blocks. And if that's the case, like I said, one or two moves and you might be gone. And then because of that, if we see things like that happening early in the season, I wouldn't be surprised if some teams who have explosive wide receivers, like a Tyreek Hill, for instance, or a Jalen Waddle, maybe start returning kicks a little bit more often like we used to see a few years ago.
Yeah, that tracks to me. Well, before we get going on fantasy real deep, how about what are your sleeper NFL teams for the year? Who's being underlooked right now that you think might make a splash? I know we're going to try and get into like our full NFL picks next week, but give us a preview here. Who are you looking at to outperform expectations?
I know you vehemently disagree with this one, but I really like what the Chargers are doing. I think anytime you bring in Jim Harbaugh, you have immediately upgraded. When he spoke during the offseason, people asked him about the weapons at skill position players leaving the team. And, you lost all these receivers and all this talent. You lost Austin Eckler. How do you plan on replenishing that? And he said, well, I feel like we did to some degree because I consider offensive linemen skill position players. And that just speaks to who Jim Harbaugh is and the type of ship that he runs. We've seen him succeed immediately everywhere in college and professional throughout his career. And that offensive line, which was already improving last year, they used the first-round pick on Joe Alt this year. They bring in, ironically, his brother's two running backs from Baltimore. Now, yes, Dobbins, you sneeze on him and he's going to get hurt. I get that. But Gus Edwards is a clear bruiser who doesn't have an injury history and clearly can run between the tackles. So I actually like the Chargers to outperform their expectations this year and probably steal a wild card spot. How about you?
I'm going to say the Colts. I think the Colts, I watched Anthony Richardson play yesterday. He had one great drive and then threw a pick six on the first play and the second drive. So it makes me a little bit nervous about this pick, but I do think the Colts were tied for the division win last year without Anthony Richardson at quarterback. I think he and Jonathan Taylor got 2 total snaps together in their careers so far. So I think the combination of those two, I think Adonai Mitchell might be a huge rookie wide receiver that a lot of people aren't talking about yet, but next to Michael Pittman there, I think they're going to have an offense to match that really good defense they have. And if Houston takes a setback at all, I think the Colts could win that division and actually see themselves in the playoffs.
You know, and in that division where I feel like Jacksonville is regressing, obviously Houston is moving up in the ranks. They're actually, I personally think Houston might make the AFC title game this year. I love everything that they're doing over there. But I totally agree. I think Indianapolis has had talent for years on both sides of the ball, and it's been one random thing or another that's really held them back. And a healthy Colts team this year that is still really deep on both sides of the ball, they could certainly make some noise. So I like that pick.
What about teams that you think are overrated? Who do you think's getting too much credit right now, and we need to bring down expectations?
I mean, I referenced them already. I think the Philadelphia Eagles. You rarely see a team just openly just quit on their coach. It wasn't just the playoff game when they got trounced by the 8-9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the playoffs, but down the stretch, they were getting drubbed on a weekly basis. They didn't look like the same team. And then you lose, what some could probably argue the best player on the team, which is Jason Kelce. And he's a big reason why they had so much success running that tush push, right? Like, we talked about it off air previously. And it's like every team is trying to replicate this, but no one really can. And he's probably the biggest reason why. So their offensive line isn't the same. The team you're bringing them back under the same guy that they had already quit on last year. I am not high on the Eagles this year.
Yeah, I think that tracks to me. I feel like mine is going to be the Ravens. Again, this is not to say I think the Ravens are a bad team, but I think a lot of people are putting them up there with the Chiefs, which I think they will be in the regular season, but I still just need to see it happen in the postseason before I believe it. I think Derrick Henry is still a good running back. I think they still have a lot of wide receiver questions that come up late in the season when you have to put points up. So I just don't know if I see them taking that next step or if they're stuck there in the AFC North battling against the Browns to see who even gets to the playoffs.
Well, and that's always a difficult division. It's a very physical division. And in a physical division, that's usually not a place to be when you just lost your three best offensive linemen, which the Ravens did during the offseason, and they already had their standout rookie from last year get hurt in camp. So it's like, the way they also run offense, you need to be physical up front. And so I think that's also another component that's being overlooked. I'm with you. I think the Ravens have the second highest over-under win total in Vegas, I believe, this year at 11.5, tied with a few other teams. And I certainly like the under. I think that division is so well-balanced like it is every year. And they seemingly always split with Pittsburgh. Cincinnati, that's a super talented team. Cleveland might be the most talented roster in the NFL. Probably the quarterback's probably their only real question mark at this point. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think people are overinflating and just assuming that Baltimore is going to get right back to where they were, and I don't think that's the case either.
All right, well, let's move over to the fantasy side here. We've got a lot of people getting ready for drafts. Everybody's gearing up. I know you and I are in a few different leagues together. For the sake of this show, when we talk about leagues, we're going to be talking about our trophy league, which is known as the League of Record, or a Fanatical Fantasy League. But that's a snake draft. It's actually a 3-wide receiver PPR league. We will try and keep our thoughts, I guess, geared towards most common leagues, like a 2-wide receiver PPR. So, but we've been playing together for 15 years. We've both won championships. We've both had horrible teams. What about, let's start off with overall draft strategy. When you're doing a snake draft here, what pick do you want to see come to you? What's your outlook depending on where you're drafting? What positions are you heading for in the first round versus the second, stuff like that?
Generally, most years, if I'm in a 12-team league, which I feel like is probably more standard than 10 these days, but it's one or the other. But I don't like being at the very end of either end. But in a 12-team league, 3rd or 10th most years is where I love to draft. I have enough information as I'm getting to that 6th, 7th, 8th round where I know if I'm drafting 3rd, I know that the 2 teams in front of me, when it's coming back around and there's going to be 4 picks before it gets back to me, I know if they've already got their quarterback or if they've already got their tight end, which means I might be able to wait a round or two And same thing if I'm drafting 10th with 11 and 12 behind me. So when you're anywhere between that, when you're 4th through 8th, there's too many picks there, outside of you that it's really difficult to gauge. But at the same time, when you're on the very end of the spectrum, you just have to wait so long for it to get back. So like most years, I love that 3rd or 10th slot. This is not one of those years, though. I think there is a very clear top 7, you could argue top 8 in the first round this year. And beyond that, I think things drop off quite considerably. Well, shouldn't say drop off, but then it's a real question mark on who you're going to go with that 9th pick.
Yeah.
Which I think you might have in one of our leagues.
In our league of record, that is where I'm sitting, is at 9th pick. And there are some guys I'm hoping fall to me. I know in every league it all depends about who has people ranked where. What about, are you aiming at, in a PPR league, are you going for a wide receiver in the first round, or you're heading running back? Or does that depend which side of the draft you're falling?
I would say 9 times out of 10 these days, I am employing the 0 RB running backs, 0 RB strategy, or an anchor RB strategy. The league is changing. Let's face it. There is significant, especially in PPR leagues, though you can never win a draft in your first few rounds. You can lose your draft in the first few rounds, which means you need to make sure you're getting guaranteed production. And I think it's 60% of your annual production on average typically comes from your first 4 players. Knowing that you're getting such volume of your consistent points from those players, you essentially can't miss. You need to make sure you're hitting on those picks. And the touchdown regression at the running back position from year to year is so drastic. It's hard to be able to gauge. Whereas at wide receiver, it is far more consistent. And in a PPR league, which has become the standard these days, I see far more value and reliability by going at least 2 receivers with 2 of my first 3 picks, and more than likely in the first round as well.
Yeah, I'm generally there. I generally try to get 2 wide receivers out of the first 3, like you said. Depending on where I sit in the draft makes a lot of differences where they come. If I'm one of those top 5 picks and I can grab one of these top 3 running backs, I probably would. Sitting where I sit at 9th pick, I'm more hoping that the receivers I want are still there.
Don't count on it, because I'm expecting the top 3 backs, Bijan, Breece, and McCaffrey, to be gone. And then more than a couple receivers, Reek and CeeDee.
Let's stop there. Before we go into the rounds, let's start with running back. What running backs, how do you have this, maybe the top tier or 2 ranked? What guys stand out in later rounds that you can pick up? Who's being undervalued? Who's being overvalued? Let's start with the running backs here.
So one back, he's going as a late RB1 in the late 2nd, early 3rd round that I think has the opportunity to finish as an RB5, RB6 overall, is Isaiah Pacheco. I came across a stat the other day on the snaps that Jerick McKinnon was not on the active roster last year. Isaiah Pacheco, his efficiency and snap percentage was so incredibly different from when McKinnon was on the active roster. And right now he's unsigned. He's an unrestricted free agent. No one has picked him up. But the tea leaves are reading as though McKinnon won't be back with the Chiefs this year. And on an offense that we saw last year is running the football consistently and far more out. Everyone just assumes it's Mahomes, it's Kelsey. They just sling the ball around the yard. Well, no, that's actually not accurate. And they have started following suit with the Patriots and the Colts model that Tom Brady and Peyton Manning used to employ, which was you pass the ball between the 20s and you run the ball into the end zone. And the Chiefs ran the ball. I think they finished 6th overall in red zone rushing attempts last year. And I expect that trend to continue this year. And so there is so much touchdown equity and positive regression coming for Pacheco this year. I think he's in store for a huge year this year.
Yeah, I think one stat that gets overlooked a lot is what these guys that were there did in the playoffs last year. There's quite a few guys, especially like you're talking Pacheco or Rashee Rice on the Chiefs, that, while they were stepping up in the regular season, that progression continued into the playoffs. And you saw like, oh, this is a player the Chiefs are relying on a lot. And I remember sitting there at the Super Bowl last year thinking Pacheco is going to be X, like to the X power next year. But when you're doing these preseason rankings, a lot of times you're looking at just the stats from last year's regular season and forgetting that some of these guys grew later on into the playoffs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
definitely
Especially
one of them.
most, your average fantasy player, like you said, they're just looking at total stats for the last year. They're not looking at, stretches of games or particular circumstances. Like I talked about with McKinnon on the field and off the field or on the roster. Like those things make a difference. And if that opportunity, I'm telling you, like that's one guy, I want him on as many teams as I could get this year.
So let me give you a couple names then. You take Pacheco or Travis Etienne.
Pacheco.
What about Pacheco or Derrick Henry?
Pacheco.
Pacheco or Jahmyr Gibbs?
Gibbs, but it's close. But I will give it to Gibbs just on sheer talent.
And then what about Saquon Barkley?
Oh, easily Pacheco. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm fading Saquon. I think we've seen the best of him. And I get, feel hey, they have all these weapons on the outside. Things should be easier. I don't trust that team to not implode.
That makes sense to me. I'd say at the running back spot, one guy that I'm fading would be Christian McCaffrey. I know he's the number one pick in so many drafts right now. I would put Breece Hall into that first slot. I think just looking at his usage, I believe it's been 12 years since the last guy to lead the league in touches has been a top 12 fantasy player the next season. He's hitting 28 years old, which is usually about that time that running backs start to take its step back. And I think this is probably the first 2-year stretch in a row he's put together healthy, which could mean maybe he's over his injury problems of the past, but it could mean that he's due to miss at least a few games this year, which would bring him back to the pack. Maybe that's an unpopular pick, and when I say fade him, I'm moving him to maybe RB2, possibly RB3, but I think I would take Breece Hall first this year with Aaron Rodgers coming back, and then McCaffrey, and then Bijan, just because I'm not still, without seeing the new production with the new coach, the new system, there's still question marks there about how much time he's going to split with Algier. And then one guy I'm really looking for in the first round, especially the second half, is Jonathan Taylor. Which especially after watching that preseason yesterday, I think they did 2 drives, 14 snaps. He played on all 14 snaps and touched the ball or ran around on like 12 of them. I think he's going to get upwards of 250 touches this year and really be back kind of where he was 2 years ago, but this time with a dynamic quarterback to open things up. I think he's a strong candidate. He could be the RB1 overall, and you're getting him at the price of, RB5 or 6 at this point.
Well, and let's not forget, he gets 6 games against the AFC South defense. Like his schedule almost every year is going to be light, and I think because he missed some time and all the contract stuff that happened last year, I think he's almost like slipped in people's consciousness about, 1, how young he is. He's still incredibly young. And 2, how talented this guy is. So I'm with you. I'm really high on him. And I know, like you said, that's an unpopular opinion on McCaffrey. In one of my leagues, I just found out that I have first pick, and it's a half PPR league instead of a full PPR. So I feel like I almost need to go running back in that spot and then maybe grab a couple of receivers when it comes back. And I'm with you. I'm not going to fall into the trap of drafting for last year. If it's been 12 years since the guy with the most touches finished as a top 12 player, I'm betting on that trend continuing. And if that's the case, I don't think it's a smart play to just base off of what we've seen from last year in McCaffrey. And I'm probably leaning Breece myself. So, that's a really good call, Drew.
What about our running back sleepers, or especially, let's say, like guys, you waited a little bit. We're kind of getting out of that mid-tier, but really guys that you think are going way underdrafted at this point that we could bump up or catch a couple rounds early in drafts that could shore up your second running back spot or be an actual RB1 if you do go no running backs.
There's a couple different guys that I feel like are going a little bit later than they should and provide plenty of value. And one of them is James Conner. Nobody really talks about this guy. And I think, every year he misses 2 or 3 games, granted. And despite that, in his 13 games, he finishes as a top 12, top 15 running back almost every year. It's been, I think, 6 straight years now that he's finished in that, somewhere in that range. And it's like, in that offense that is only going to get better, and they have a healthy Kyler Murray, and there are more weapons around him, finally, now that they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, I think at this point is undeniably one of the more talented tight ends in the league. It should open things up even more for him than what he's seen in the past, at least since he got to Arizona. And it almost seems like no matter what system he is, he's always had a great nose for the goal line. The guy scores touchdowns. And let's not forget game script. Arizona has a terrible defense. They're still going to be behind all the time, and he catches 40 to 60 balls a game. And when defenses when their opponents are up by 20 playing prevent defense, who's going to be the beneficiary? Not so much the wide receivers, more so James Conner getting, scat back passes out of the backfield for 7-8 yards 4 times a game. So that's one guy I really, really like and think he's going criminally underdrafted. And I wouldn't be surprised if he cracks a top 10 this year. And then another guy that has dropped off quite considerably, and he had such a strong finish, but I don't think anyone really trusts him, is Zamir White with the Raiders. I know it's not the ideal situation on a low-scoring offense with some question marks at quarterback, but if you look at his metrics from last year and what he did down the stretch in limited work, it was really impressive, so much so that they were fine to move on and just name him as their RB1, and he's going anywhere in the 7th to the 9th round, and to get a starting running back who might be close to a bell cow that late in the draft, I see value there. How about you?
James Conner's a good one, like you said. I know maybe my Dolphins fandom is going to show here, but one of them would be Raheem Mostert, who's going right now, I think, running back 25 to 28 range. It's almost 10 spots behind Devon Achane, who he was the clear number 1-2 last year. I feel like Mike McDaniels loves him. I don't think they're going away from him. I do feel like Achane is going to have a great year as well. But, I mean, a lot of people are spending tier 2 running back money on Derrick Henry, who's about to hit 30, and you're kind of hoping for a 20-touchdown season. Mostert's 28, 29, coming off a 21 touchdown season in a similar same offense, same personnel. Like I don't know if I see him getting 21 touchdowns again, but the price he's at right now, you could be getting a solid RB1 with running back 29 value.
In the 8th round. It's amazing that people, because they saw flashes of what Achane can do, they just assume, well, he's going to take over and it's going to be his backfield and Mostert might get a little run. It's like a guy doesn't go from 21 touchdowns and like 5 yards per carry to being irrelevant the next year. It just doesn't happen. And
I think Achane is also going to be used out of the slot a lot this year. The Dolphins have a great top end of wide receivers, but it gets thin after the top 2, especially with ODB injured. You're going to see Achane running a lot of routes while Mostert is still in the back. And especially when it comes down to goal line situations, last year it seemed like he was the one they went to.
Yeah, no. For sure.
Another one I have that I feel like he's going about RB 40 right now is Jerome Ford. It's looking like Nick Chubb's going to start the season on the PUP list, which means at least 4 to 8 weeks. Jerome Ford's going to be the only back there. And with Nick Chubb's age and injuries, who knows what he's going to come back as. He may never be that Nick Chubb. I mean, hopefully he is that Nick Chubb again, but I wouldn't expect it. Coming off that injury, I wouldn't expect him to be back to 100% even when he does get back. Yeah. Jerome Ford has a great offensive line in front of him. He has weapons around him where he's not the only guy defenses can concentrate on. And he really put up a solid year last year when Nick Chubb was out.
Yeah.
I cannot understand why this guy's going running back 39 when he's the clear number 1 running back on a team that scores points and runs the ball. The only downside being that Chubb, may come back mid-season, but I would say for the first half of the season, he could carry your team and be the 3rd running back you drafted.
Yeah, I think obviously the fact that Chubb will come back at some point, that's baked into his price, right? And people are concerned that if I draft Ford, yeah, he might help me for 8 weeks, for 4 to 8 weeks, but then he might be irrelevant after that. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to win a championship, right? But if you can get him that late, maybe he blows up the first 3-4 weeks of the season, and then you move him. You know, if there's any news that says, yeah, Chubb's going to be out at least another 4 weeks, you might be able to.
Chubb could come back and re-injure himself. But let's also not forget that for the last 3 or 4 years, with Nick Chubb there, the Browns were still carrying 2 viable fantasy running backs.
Yeah, Kareem Hunt was putting up numbers there.
Was putting up solid fantasy numbers with Nick Chubb. So I think while that price is baked in, I think even if Nick Chubb comes back, you're not going to see Jerome Ford
just fall off.
Be useless. He's still going to be a guy that you could go to or throw in the flex. And yeah, again, just at the price he's going at right now, which is rounds behind Nick Chubb even, I think he's definitely one I'd pick up.
All right, well, how about
what about running backs? Real quick, though, give me a running back that you are not picking no matter what at his current price anyways, but running backs you're staying away from.
There is one guy particularly, you couldn't pay me to draft this guy. Well, no, I guess you could. If you pay my buy-in, then maybe I would draft him, but that would probably be what it would cost. It's the Buccaneers' Rachaad White. I mean, this guy, you know, he basically finished his RB4 last year solely on volume, right? I think he finished with 4 less touches than McCaffrey on the year. But unlike McCaffrey, who had insane efficiency and scored in the red zone and did everything, Rachaad White's efficiency was the worst in the league. Among 49 qualifying running backs, I think he was 46th in yards after first contact. Like, you look at every metric, he was flat out awful. And now all the reports out of camp in Tampa Bay are Bucky Irving, the rookie that they drafted, looks really, really good. And I don't think it's going to take a whole lot before we see, wait a minute, that's right, this guy's not very good. And we have some weapons around us. Tampa Bay, they can move the football. And you give Bucky a little bit of run, maybe he runs with that. And knowing that there's a legit opportunity for Bucky Irving to steal his job by week 4, and knowing that Rachaad White's going in the second round of most PPR drafts, I want 0 shares of that guy on my team.
Okay, well, that leads me to, would Bucky Irving be the rookie running back you're looking to pick up?
I mean, there's a few guys out there, but he's definitely one that stands out for sure. Is there one in particular that you have your eyes set on?
Again, going Dolphins, I love Jalen Wright's upside. Again, more as a last round.
I mean, he needs an injury, though, to have any real presence, I think, right?
And both guys ahead of him had 2 injuries last year, and Raheem Moster's had about an injury per season, so it's definitely not.
Right, that's fair.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, final round pickup. HN has been hurt since he came in since college, and Mostert spent a lot of time on and off the injury report. So I think Jalen Wright's that guy that 4 or 5 weeks into the season, it starts being like, oh shoot, who had Jalen Wright? If he's the only guy left on the Miami offense to score points.
Star? He's another track star I think, right?
I'm not sure if he was a track star or not. Maybe.
No,
I know he's a
4.340.
Yeah, he's definitely a 4.340 guy,
and
can break some tackles too. Had a great year last year at Tennessee. And then running back, I'm staying away from. I'd say 2. I'm not going anywhere near Pittsburgh's running backs. I don't know what's going to happen with that offense. I feel like they're going to be back and forth between 2 mediocre quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I don't trust those running backs, either one. I think Najee I've had the last 2 years and has done nothing for me. I don't even see that offense being productive enough to support one running back, and I think they're going to split carries. That being said, I'm sure the Steelers will still go 9-8 and make the playoffs, but...
Well, you know what's weird? I was with you on both Steelers backs, and then I started looking into some of the data from last year, and shockingly, Najee Harris, like the advanced metrics actually say he had a really efficient year. He was top 10 in a number of statistical categories, and now the overall stat lines for both of them weren't that great, but both guys were essentially flex plays most of the year. Especially toward the second half of the year, Jaylen Warren was a consistent flex option for teams down the stretch. And they're still going to run the ball quite considerably there. So like I could still see them being fantasy relevant, but I can't possibly go into this season assuming either of them, or if you have either of them as your RB2, I think you're looking for trouble. If maybe you get one into your flex, that might work, but RB2 and above, I think you're asking for it.
All right, well, you mentioned quarterbacks. Obviously that's what's your quarterback strategy first in drafts? It's obviously a less prime position. We're playing a 1 QB league. Are you taking one of these top tier guys? Are you waiting and getting a guy in the middle? Or are you not taking a quarterback whatsoever?
There's a number of guys in the middle. I'm definitely not going to be one of the people that draft Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. Don't get me wrong, nothing against those guys, and they very well might produce the numbers again that back up that draft price. But there is, the drop-off, at least from what I project, to the next range of quarterbacks, whether that's Kyler, who's never finished below quarterback 10 in any season. He started at least 13 games, which is every year of his career except for one. Or C.J. Stroud, or Jordan Love, who I think is going really underdrafted. He's going as QB 10 in most leagues. I have him as my QB 7. There are so many guys in the middle tier for quarterbacks that I think are looking at pretty solid years, and I can get them 6 rounds later, 4 to 6 rounds later in a lot of drafts. So I definitely won't be grabbing one of the premier guys. And then even if I miss out there, Brock Purdy is going as like QB 13, QB 14 in most drafts. He finished, his QB 6 last year, I think it was. And it's like, if Ayuk is still there, they're running the same offense with the same coach, with the same schedules. Like, I don't see any reason with those why he doesn't produce numbers again. You can get him whenever you can get him, practically in the last round of the draft. Caleb Williams is going essentially in the last round of the draft. And, last time we saw a guy with that kind of hype coming out of college, I think he panned out pretty well. So like, even if you missed the middle round guys, there's still some guys late. So I'm definitely not investing early stock.
Yeah, I'm definitely a proponent of waiting on the QB. I usually end up with somebody at the low end, but I really like some of the rookies this year. I like who you just mentioned, Caleb Williams, and then I love Jaden Daniels too. Caleb Williams' situation may be the best situation I've ever seen a rookie walk into. When you've got Rome Odunze, who's one of the best college receivers we've seen in a while, coming to the team, as well as Keenan Allen, who has been one of the most consistent fantasy performers for 10 years, it feels like.
Yeah.
Adding to DJ Moore, who's a clear-cut number 1. You've got a really great defense to support you. I think he's also an underrated runner. And then Jaden Daniels, feel like the same way, could put up a lot of points. And you're getting these guys, again, at QB 14 or 15. I'd much rather have Caleb Williams than Aaron Rodgers this year.
Well, and let's not also forget that the running back they brought in, DeAndre Swift, is one of the best receiving backs in the NFL. Like, that's essentially kind of the only reason why he still has an RB1 job in the NFL, because he's still struggling to run between the tackles consistently. But man, if you can get him in a little bit of space, he's still great at making guys miss. So like, yeah, there are so many weapons for that guy to work with. It, at the very least, Bears fans can finally go into a season excited that like they should be able to have fun watching their team play on Sundays.
All right, so what about in the wide receiver category here? Let's move over to the big studs. Most of our drafts we're starting off with wide receivers. Who do you have at like the top of your wide receiver list? I know we've had some debate about this personally. Is there a tier of 3? Is there a tier of 2? Where do you rank these top 5 or 6 wideouts?
I have CD and Tyreek in a tier by themselves. And if it's half PPR, I'm going Tyreek. If it's full PPR, I'm going CD. Because the volume is there for CD, but Tyreek is more likely to get, only 5 catches for 150 yards. And so that's, to me, they're slightly a step above everyone else. And then that class of Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, maybe A.J. Brown, even though I have some questions about that Eagles offense, and even Garrett Wilson. Like, I know that we haven't seen him be able
You're breaking
the
up
situation and seemingly not wanting to play football, or at least practice with his team at times. It doesn't really seem to have priority in the game. If he does actually, put some pride and show up for his team, I think Garrett Wilson could easily have wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 within his realm of possibilities this year. So that's why I would put him in that second tier as well. And if I land any one of those guys in the first round, I feel pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I'm biased, but I'll take Tyreek at the 1 there. I'll take CD. I'd say really, though, I'd go that next tier, Jamar Chase, and then I'd agree with you, maybe even a little stronger. I'd put Garrett Wilson after Jamar Chase. I'd have him as my number 4 overall. It's close with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Justin Jefferson, I don't trust Sam Darnold at all. I still think Justin Jefferson's going to be a top wide receiver as long as he's playing, even if I was throwing him the ball. But I don't trust when you're talking Aaron Rodgers is Garrett Wilson's quarterback, and Garrett Wilson has looked every part of the guy who could be overall wide receiver 1, playing with some of the worst quality targets in the league. I think giving him one of the most accurate arms, they're looking good in preseason. He's got the running game, so you can't just double team him on both sides. Like I really think he's got the upside of some insane numbers here. I know he's one I'm really looking to get in the back half of drafts in the first round right now.
Yeah. Well, I agree certainly with that. One thing I will say about Justin Jefferson, because initially I was hesitant on him as well, and then I just recently read, everyone's like, I don't trust Sam Darnold. Like, how can I trust Sam Darnold, right? Well, last year, Justin Jefferson, with Nick Mullins as his starting quarterback for 5 games, averaged 22.3 fantasy points per game for those 5 games. So it's like some guys are quarterback proof. We've heard of players being matchup proof. Justin Jefferson might literally be quarterback proof. Like, that's how good this guy is. He's essentially breaking every single record that receivers can possibly break each year of his career. So, that quarterback switch maybe moved him down behind Chase or Amon-Ra for me, possibly, but like he's right there with those guys. Like he's just.
I mean, I'd agree. He is quarterback proof. I'm simply moving Garrett Wilson up a little bit, but like you said, any of these guys, I'd be more than happy to have on my team.
All right. Do you have any receivers that are going late that you're targeting that you think could really provide some value?
I think Christian Watson could step up in Green Bay, but I do feel like it's kind of a crapshoot there as to who is going to. I feel like one of these guys, whether it's Dobbs or Watson, is going to step up.
But that's exactly one of the reasons why it's scary to take those guys, right? They have 4 guys. Don't forget they have the one with the hyphenated last name.
Jaden Reed as well.
Montavious Wicks. Like, they got 4 guys. We don't know which one's going to really become the number 1. There might not be a number 1. And Christian Watson's talent, I think, is undeniable. But last year, second straight year, I think he had like a 53% catch percentage. So essentially when the ball gets thrown his way, you flip a coin as to whether or not he's going to catch it. So that doesn't bode well. His injury history certainly doesn't bode well. And then also the fact that there's 4 receivers and maybe 2 will pan out and 2 won't. Like, personally, that's a guy I'm fading away. I don't want any part of Watson.
One guy I like, I would say, is Jackson Smith and Jigba in Seattle. I think he was hyped up last year. Everybody was really big on him. I think first-year wide receivers generally struggle a bit.
Yeah,
I think that, I think the opportunity is still there. I think this guy's still insane in college. I think this is the year he takes a big step up and, becomes one of these Nico Collins guys where it's like, oh, shoot, I forgot about him, and is now really taking away top share targets on his team. I also think, looking over the Chargers, Quentin Johnson could be really productive this year, with no more Keenan Allen. They've got Josh Palmer, but you do have Justin Herbert. You got to think this team's going to throw the ball, especially with the
Harbaugh's already
running
been
backs
talking
they've
him
got.
up too in camp.
They've looked like they have a connection together. I think you can get him right now in the 13th or 14th round, and he could turn into a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 by the end of the season.
So I'll tell you one guy that I love based on where he's being drafted, and I'm keeping him in my keeper league for sure, is Christian Kirk. He has finished no worse than, I think, 23rd in PPR rankings any season. And now with Ridley gone, they drafted a rookie receiver. But as you talked about, like rookie receivers, sometimes they make no impact the first season. And even if he makes some impact, Kirk should be fed quite considerably in that offense. The only other pass catcher they have is Evan Ingram. And they're a team that is very likely going to be trailing and having to come back. I think a lot of people expect Jacksonville to regress a little bit more this year. Their over-under, I think, is sitting at 8.5. They should be in plenty of shootouts. So, like, Christian Kirk going in the 6th or 7th round, I feel like he has the upside of finishing in the wide receiver 10 to 15 range, and he's going anywhere from wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 23. And it's like, if he's dropping, man, that's one guy I love this year.
All right, last but not least, what about the tight ends? Again, what's your strategy? Are you taking a tight end in the first 5-6 rounds? Are you waiting till the end? And then who are you looking for?
I'm actually taking a similar approach to tight ends that I am with quarterbacks. I've almost never been one of the guys that takes one of the elite tight ends, taking a tight end in the first round. I think I've done it once or twice out of the 70 or so times I've drafted a team, and it didn't pan out well that one time, so that certainly didn't sway me. But yeah, there's too many talented tight ends in the middle tiers. Like I touched on Evan Ingram. Like, Ingram caught, I think, 110 balls, 115 balls last year. He's a tight end. Like, that's insane. He's going as the 8th tight end off the board. Dude caught 115 passes in a PPR, and then Ridley's gone. So there's, at the very least, the same volume should be there in terms of targets. So I don't see any reason a guy like him. There's a few others in that middle tier. Even Jake Ferguson, he's going 9th or 10th off the board. Like, in that offense, we've seen a Dallas tight end put up starting numbers, 3-4 years in a row now. So there's a number of guys in that range. I'm not one to spend to get Kelsey or McBride or Laporta. I think it's well worth the wait.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do really like McBride. I'd probably have my McBride as my number 1 tight end for this year over those guys you just talked about. Wow. That being said, I probably still won't draft him. By the 4th round, I'm still not ready to take a tight end usually. If he came to me in the 5th, I'd be really tempted. It just depends which league you're drafting. But I could get away a guy that's a sleeper to me that I know, again, my bias is showing, but Jonnu Smith in Miami in the preseason drives, he's getting a lot of touches. You can get him in the last round, and you could trot him out there, and he still could be a touchdown machine like he was last year. I think he's going to be uncovered over the middle a lot, and the Dolphins are going to throw it a ton. I think there's some play there. But whether you're getting, like you said, a Hawkinson, or sorry, you didn't say Hawkinson, but Hawkinson's one you could pick up. I feel like that once he comes back from injury, I'm not sure when he's going to be back, but the second half of the year, I could see Hawkinson making a really big impact.
Yep.
Brock Bowers on the Raiders could do something for you. There's a lot of guys in that middle tier that could save you. And then how much are you going to trust Travis Kelce as he's getting old? Mark Andrews, who seems to have a different injury issue pop up every year.
Yep.
Kyle Pitts is one who could be tight end 1 this year, or he could continue to not do anything on the Falcons. It's really hard to say. So I'd be happy going into the season with a solid David Njoku, who I know is going to put up 8 to 10 points a game and spend my money where I know it's going to get a return.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm glad that we took the time to dive into this position by position. We're a little less than 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL season, and every week we're definitely going to be diving pretty heavily into fantasy. But another angle of the show that we're also going to talk about is the sports betting. And I'd like to get to that really quickly before we wrap up this first episode. So when the season approaches, we'll likely be breaking down individual games and lines and opportunities to make money. But there's also another element to sports betting that almost no one takes advantage of. And I personally have been taking advantage of it for a couple of years, and there's such glaring opportunity there to really recognize certain trends in Vegas and use them against them. And so in the segment, Kendall's Corner, each week I'm going to break down a couple different money line parlay bets. In general, in sports betting, parlays are a joke, and you should pretty much almost never make them. That's how Vegas became Vegas. You know, hey, we'll offer you 3-1, but you got to hit both of them. We'll offer you 5-1, but you got to hit all three. It's really difficult when you don't know who's going to cover the spread on just one of the games, right? But in professional sports, when there is a really, really good team against a really, really bad team, especially in the NFL, when the Chiefs are playing the Giants, guess what? We know the Chiefs are going to win that game. We don't know if they're going to cover that 16.5-point spread. Who knows? That's why Vegas put the line there, right? And they're so good. But we know if they play that game 100 times, the Chiefs are going to win it 97 times, right? And now, yes, if you bet the Chiefs money line individually, you're laying 10-1. Like, there's no value there. But there's almost always a couple money line bets where you know one side is going to win 95 times out of 100. And when you recognize a couple of those and you put them together, all of a sudden you're getting even money, or a lot of times better than even money, on what is almost a sure bet. Last year on the Lay the Points podcast, I hit 68% of my bets by doing this exact thing. And it's all documented. Second season I've done it. And so this year, during this segment, I'm going to pick and choose one or two of these opportunities. And so right now I'm looking at NFL futures. And one thing that really stood out to me was the moneyline parlay to put together to make the playoffs, Chiefs, Niners, and personally, I love Houston. They went to the AFC division round last year. They got even better on paper this year. Their division arguably got weaker this year. If you put those three together to make the playoffs, you get better than even money. So I love that as a futures bet. And then also, if you are as big of a fan, or I shouldn't say fan, as big of a proponent as I am of Harbaugh and the Chargers, and believe they're at least looking at a good season, which would mean second place to the Chiefs, of course, you can make two separate bets choosing the exact order of that division. If you go Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, Broncos, you get plus 320. Let's say you bet $100 to win 420. And then you also place a $100 bet, Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos, Raiders, and you get plus 550 on that bet. So you'd win either 550 or 320, depending upon which one of those hit, minus the 100 for the losing on the other one. But if you feel as confidently as I do that the Chiefs are winning that division, which I think everybody agrees, and you believe in the Chargers and Harbaugh will come in second, you literally can't lose that bet. So those are the two futures that I'm playing this week. And next week, we'll dive more into the actual games themselves.
I love it. I think of the two, I'd go with the Raiders over Denver, but I trust in Minshew magic. I think it's coming. Let's get to some.
Denver's trending up a little bit after seeing what Bo Nix looks like.
Yeah, I'll trust it when I see it.
Yeah,
but
that is fair.
Let's get into, before we close out here, let's go. We're going to put some audience questions out there. So we'd love if anybody can come back answer on any of our platforms. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Winning Play Pod. We're on YouTube as the Winning Play Podcast. You can find this anywhere they show podcasts or play podcasts. But comment, let us know. We want to know two things. Your best sleepers of the year, guys that are going late in drafts that you think could make a huge difference to this season. And then also, we want your best 2024 fantasy team names. And I want to say specifically, if you and your brother Jimmy have some name that means something to your family from 15 years ago and you think it's funny, that's all we're talking about. I want bad puns with guys' names, overall sports movie tropes, something that will hit. But give me some ideas. I got some teams to name this year, and I'm going to try and pick from some of the ones we get.
Well, and I need the help because one of my baseball teams is named Team Name Here. So
there you go.
I would appreciate it, everyone.
The Commanders went with that for a couple of years, actually. So that's all right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining the first episode of the Winning Play Podcast. I'm Drew James. This is Kendall Caps. We hope to see you here throughout the NFL season. We'll do fantasy recaps, fantasy previews, betting previews, sleeper picks, and just NFL talk. So thanks for coming.